Graham Buzz Bidstrup, welcome to Australian Musician.
Fantastic to be here, Greg. It's nice to have a chat.
Yeah, we're talking about this great new book that you've got out called No Secrets, your memoir of music and mayhem in the music business with the Angels, Party Boys, Gangajang, management, production. Rick,
I have a big hat rack.
yeah,
Big hat.
reading the book reminds me of the Woody Allen film Zelig. Have you have you seen that?
I love it. Yes.
Where he just shows up in so many historical moments in time and with iconic celebrities. And with you, it's like pick an Australian band and there's a Buzz Bidstrup thread in there somewhere.
I've been involved one way or another or with one of the members or something.
Yeah. How long did it take you to write this book? And did you just go by memory? Did you have diaries?
Yeah, look, a bit of both. I started writing it at a question from one of my nephews, who said, "Hey, my parents say you do this and you do that and you make records and you manage people, but what do you really do? Like, how do you do it?" So I started just writing down some stuff, really, just to I guess help them make sense of what I do. But then I started remembering things, and I've always been a bit of a storyteller, but around the bar after the gig, and you sort of somebody say, "Hey, tell us that story about so and so." So I could remember a bit. I did have some diaries which had more um, operational stuff rather than emotional stuff. It's just like, oh, in the studio here, recording that, doing that, so and so's coming in, and so I had those kind of things to rely on. But it took about 3 years, I guess, from the time of going, okay, I'm really going to write this. And COVID came around at the right time, because the other work that I do with managing the charity, that all stopped. So I had time to do a bit of work, and showed it to a couple of friends of mine who were published authors, and they said, if you took that bit there and put that bit there and moved that bit around and did that, it'd be a really good memoir.
Yeah.
There
Um,
you go.
I'm always interested in the structure of books. Why did you decide to start the book with breaking away from the Angels?
I guess because well, when I say most, a lot of people know me as the drummer of the early Angels, and co-writer of songs and stuff like that. So I I figured that was probably the biggest fork in my journey to date. I mean, I'd had this dream as a kid of playing in a band. I played in bands from when I was 14, but I'm in a real, like, doing it for turning professional, as they used to say. And I'd sort of gone through that journey, and it hadn't been, it was a very big moment because I had to make the decision whether I wanted to stay in the Angels and spend another 3 to 5 years making very, very little money while other people got quite rich, um, or whether I should just break away and follow my other passion, which was making music, recording music. And I had a friend, as I say in the book, Cameron Allen, who used to run Regular Records with Martin Fabini, and he kind of offered me a little lifeline and a way to sort of go from being the drummer of the Angels to going into more production work and making the film music with him. So I just took it. It was a spur of the moment, to be honest. I just had to leave.
Yeah.
Had to go and do something else.
Yeah, the songwriting credits with the Angels was a bit of a sticking point, as it is with so many bands.
Mm.
But
It's not so much the credit, even, it's more the uneven distribution of wealth that comes from songwriting.
yeah, of course, you've named the book "No Secrets," which is the great classic Angel song that you co-wrote with Doc. Tell me about that writing session.
Well, I started off in the Angels. I had three co-writes on the first album. I did a lot of work on the production and arrangement of the next two albums. And when it came to the third album, Doc turned up at my place one day and he said, "I really want to write a song with you. You know, so what do you got? What have you got?" And I had this chord progression, and I'd almost, had the whole thing done in terms of music. I had the melodies, I had the arrangement and everything. And I said to Docky, look, I haven't got any lyrics for this. And he said, perfect, perfect, in his beautiful way. And he said, hey, I'll tell you about something that happened to me the other day. I picked up this hitchhiker, and I gave her a lift, and just a short in the short ride that I gave her, she poured out her story to me, and her name was Amanda, and she was an actress. And he said, when I dropped her off, I went round and got out my book, and I wrote down everything I could remember about Amanda, the actress. And he said, and here I've got a set of lyrics that I've made from it. And he opened it up and then listened to what I'd done. And he said, it's amazing. That just fits. It fitted perfectly. We didn't have to do much at all to make it work.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a beautiful moment.
Yeah, for sure. Some of my favorite rock and roll moments were seeing bands at Bombay Rock in the late 70s.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing the Angels sometimes 2 or 3 nights in a row at Bombay Rock.
In Bombay Rock in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Look, yeah, we were, at one stage very successful band, and we could command 3 nights there. It was a pretty wild place.
Yeah.
It was.
I certainly had a lot of fun.
I bet you did.
Um, Another thing you did with the Angels, you're on tour with the Kinks,
Yes.
and you got kicked off the tour basically because you were too good, I think.
I think that's pretty much the reason. The poor old Ray Davies, he was a bit of a paranoid fella, who couldn't understand that having a band, having a support band like us was actually doing them good. And I explained to someone the other day, had we started that tour on the East Coast instead of the West Coast, we were, what I say, virtually unknown on the East Coast because we'd only played it a couple of times. But on the West Coast, we'd played Portland and Seattle and Vancouver. We'd played them 3 times. So the Kinks would be the 4th time we played there. And the last time we played in Seattle, for example, we sold out a 3,000 seater at full price. So just go to the Kinks thing. There was at least half the people that were at the Kinks gig, I think that was a 10,000 seater or something, who knew about us. We were being played on the radio. So we were popular, and we did get offered an encore. And they just wouldn't let us do one. So Doc in his rebel Irish way, when told that he was not allowed to use the little walkway there that that only Ray Davies was allowed to use to walk out into the middle of the crowd, he grabbed a handheld microphone and went running through the crowd. And then he was told he wasn't allowed to do that. And he just said, well, I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
He did it again. And that's when it really got heavy. That's when we didn't get a sound check. That's when, my drum kit was set up on the floor on the side, not on a riser. It got out of control. But it was just basically his paranoia. We had a drink afterwards one night, and we were staying at the same hotel as the band, coincidentally, as the Kinks. And Chris and I were having a drink after the gig, and the drummer, Mick Avery, and the keyboard player and the bass player turned up to have a drink. And we were thinking, oh, this is going to get a bit weird, but they were really friendly and basically apologized for the Davies brothers as being a little bit, hard to deal with. And they said, we find it hard to deal with them too.
Did that put you off meeting your music heroes?
Well, I explain in the book the first night we played with the Kinks was in Chicago, and I walked out of our dressing room and there was a long corridor. And as I walked out to head towards the stage, Dave Davies walked out of his room, which was further down, and we met, face to face. And I held out my hand and I said, oh, really honored to meet you. I was a huge Kinks fan, a big part of my youth, and looking forward to this tour. And he looked straight past me to a security guard and said, how do you get to the stage? And my hand's still hanging out, and I just thought, you bastard.
Yeah.
That's really not very cool at all.
Yeah. You mentioned that you did have a bit of a following in parts of America. The Angels, along with Rose Tattoo and AC/DC, were very influential on some of the Sunset Strip bands in LA. Did you get a sense of that when you were there?
I got a sense of it from a couple of the people that we worked with there. Um, um, Ed Cherney was one who was an engineer. He had also worked with Guns N' Roses, so he told us that Guns N' Roses were big fans of our music. Obviously, he had worked with the Angels as well, so that that was he had passed that on. And I think also there was a bit of a buzz, I might say, about the Angels, or Angel City as we were there, which was a terrible name, I might say. But there was, I mean, calling yourself Angel City is going to cause either grief, or you're going to get props if you go to LA. And we fortunately did okay. Like we weren't ridiculed for having that name, and I think there was a fair kind of recognition of our music for sure.
Yeah. Another icon you toured with was David Bowie, and his drummer, Dennis Davis, was quite impressed with your drumming style. Tell me a bit more about that.
Oh, that was a beautiful moment. I mean, when as soon as I found out who was in Bowie's band, Dennis Davis had played with the Stevie Wonder. Um, he'd been taught by the great Max Roach. There was all sorts of things that I just wanted to get to meet this guy and just tell him how much I loved his drumming. So on the first night, we just watched them do their sound check, and he had two bass drums, eight tom toms. He had cymbals everywhere, and he was an incredible drummer. We set up our gear afterwards. I had one bass drum, two tom toms, a snare drum, and two cymbals. We did our sound check, and we were invited to go and have some dinner, which included sitting down with David Bowie and the band, and that was really surreal, and cool. But as I got up to walk off, I heard this voice saying, "Hey man, hey, I want to talk to you about your fucking left hand, man. What are you doing with that fucking left hand? What do you do there?" And it's because I play open hand, right? I don't play like this or like this. I play like this. And he was basically saying to me, "I like how you work your left hand, how I can play 16ths on my left hand." And he said, "Man, that's so good. That's so good." So the next night we set up, we go to the sound check, and he's got one bass drum, two tom toms, four cymbals, and I just went, "Man, that is so cool." So I should have turned up with two bass drums and eight tom toms.
Tell me about your drum kit journey through the years. Did you ever have endorsement deals?
I did. I had one with Pearl, and Billy Hyde's back in the day, when you'd see the Billy Hyde's drum clinic on all the fronts of the drums, and they were great. They would obviously get really good PR out of it, but it also meant, when our lighting guy, it was kind of funny. He said one time, he said, "I'm sick of your black drum kit, or I think a blue one or something." He said, "I want you to have a red drum kit." So I just rang up Billy Hyde's and Pearl, and I said, "Look, I love my drum kit that I've got, but our lighting guy wants to get a red drum kit." They said, "Yeah, cool, no worries, go and pick one out." So I get a red drum kit, um, and yeah, I really enjoyed that right up until today, actually.
Yeah. So what have you got now?
I've got a Pearl export, that I still use. I've got a couple of Ludwig kits that I still record with sometimes, but yeah, it's mainly a nice Pearl export kit.
Yeah. You've seen a lot of changes in the recording world as well. I think your journey began with your cousin's Telefunken tape
Yeah,
machine. Was
yes.
was that the first piece of gear you really used?
That really was, and my grandmother had one as well. It's back in those days, people used to send tapes to England and to friends and stuff. They'd send these tapes, so there were tape recorders around. Yeah, my first way was one tape recorder. I played a little bit of guitar onto it, and then it went from that one to the next tape recorder, and I added some drumming, which was just basically old boxes, cardboard boxes and things. Then I went back again the other way and sang on it. So yeah, that was my first taste of that. I reckon I was about 11 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Working with guys like Mark Opitz and Mark Moffat, tell me about their influence on you.
Well, yeah, both incredible engineers and lovely people. So there's a great thing to start with when you're uh, Mark and I were the same age. I think Mark Moffat was probably a couple of years older than me, but you know, Mark Opitz at the start when I was in the Angels, having someone that if you ask them a question about what does that button do or why are you doing that, or you know, to get them to actually respond and say, well, this is what that does, da 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 da. And if you want to know some more, come back when I've just finished doing this, and I'll tell you some more. To the point of going to when I do my drum tracks for the Angels, the guitar players, God love them, would take far longer to do their bit than I'd sort of do it in a couple of takes. I'd be like, there you go, there's the drum track, right? And rather than sit around and look silly, Mark Opitz would just say, hey, there's another studio over there. Quickly, I'll come and show you how to get it going. And he showed me how to set the studio up. He showed me how to get it all going. And when I knew how to do that, dear George Young gave me a key to the studio. And he said, here's your key to the studio. You can use this place anytime you like. You know, because I used to make all of this different kind of music. It wasn't really Angels music. It was more soundtrack music and a bit avant-garde and a bit kind of different different to the Angels anyway. So yeah, and Mark Moffat was very similar. When I first started, I went to festival to do a Riptides record, and Mark was the in-house engineer there. Lovely, lovely fella. Immediately, I was saying to him, I couldn't work out one of the pieces of equipment. Oh, no, easy. No, you do this, you do that. Boom, 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 boom. So having people that passed on their tricks to you was incredibly important for me to get to the point of where, by sort of 1982, I could engineer pretty much my own recordings anywhere except for Tiny Tim.
George Young, he taught you about drum loops?
Yes, he did. He um he used to make these 24 track drum loops, so 2-inch tape, and he'd have I mean I heard the what became Lovers in the Air, and he had another song, uh I call you standing in the rain. He had that da 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 da, and that was just a drum loop going around and around, going ba 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 da 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 with the kick drum, and he'd have on the side of the wall, he'd have a little fill, so it'd be on 2-track tape, and he'd ba 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 bum bum, and it'd just be lying there, and he'd grab the drum loop, put a cut in the. Well, he had the drum loop that was doing the da 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 da, and he'd put that onto another tape. So then he'd just cut the tape, put the drum fill in where he wanted them, and it was an incredible process to watch him doing that. And he taught me how to do that. He taught me how to do 24, 2-inch tape editing. He taught me so much. It was incredible, and he was very generous with his time.
Yeah. You say in the book you were one of the first people in Australia to own an Oberheim DMX.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I kind of embraced that at the time. I was doing the film soundtrack stuff with Cameron, and in the day, uh, before you'd have a click track, and you'd have times, and you go, okay, when the guy opens that door, you want something to happen, right? And you'd work out the bar. You'd have to work out what tempo you had to put the music to so that most of these hit points would work. Um, and once I had the DMX drum machine, it was really simple because you get it to sync up with the tape, and then you could watch the film, and it was just so simple. You just sort of look at it and you go, "Yep, there it is," and you could change the tempo on it as well, really simply. Um, but the best thing about it was that Rory O'Donoghue and Graham Bond used to make ads. They were kind of big ad guys, and they work at 301, and they came into the studio one day, and they said, because they'd get me sometimes to do little bits and pieces for them, just drums or percussion stuff on their ads. And they said, hey, what's that? I said, that's a drum machine. And they went, man, what does that do? And I said, like this, boom, and a drum thing will come up. And they go, hey, can we hire that from you? And I said, yeah, sure you can, no probs. And they did so many ads that they paid for that drum machine with the high. I told them one day, I said, you realize that you're paying me, you could buy one of those yourself. And they said, no, 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 we'd rather just pay you. So I thought that was cool.
The Roland Jupiter 4 was another piece of gear, which
JP4 was another one, and then I got a JP8, and then I started getting Prophet synthesizers. Um, I love the fact that you can muck around with the sound. And in film music, of course, you use those things all the time. You're always looking for a big, a dark pad or something to make that a little sparkly or whatever. So yeah, I just embraced that right from the start, and also being in the studio, we got all of the new bits of equipment that would come out. So the sales reps would always be saying, "Hey, here's a new delay unit or a new reverb. Why don't you try it? Here, try one for a week and see if you like it." So we'd get to use all the latest equipment all the time.
yeah. You also got to watch people like Bob Clearmountain and Hugh Padgham at work. What did you learn from guys like that?
Look, I think it was really the process. They had a slightly different process than the engineers, the Australian engineers that I'd seen. Some of the guys that I knew, Australian guys, had been overseas, and they sort of came back with, hey, they're doing this over there. So I'd watch, I'd get I'd offer to be the studio, um, you know, tea boy. I said, look, I'll just be at the back. If anyone wants a cup of tea or anything like that, I'll do that, right? Because all I wanted to do was watch them and find out what they did and how they went about doing it, particularly doing a mix and stuff. The use of compressors and things like that, they had a different way of using them, and that was really interesting to get to know, and how they would, where they would put their delay units, whether they would put them on a mix bus. I know it sounds very technical, but whether they'd sort of take them straight from the source or whether they put them on a little bus, and there's little things like that that were great pieces of knowledge.
Yeah. And you sold a mixing console to Noel Gallagher from Oasis.
I did. I feel like catching up with him, trying to get back standards day now, but I believe he sold it. I believe he sold it to somebody in Tasmania, and
Oh,
I'm trying to track them down. I'm trying to find out where it's gone. It was a beautiful old mixing desk. It was a TG 12345 Mark III. And I noticed it actually in news feeds the other day. They're selling an Abbey Road console, the one that the Beatles used. When you look at that, that was the next model up from mine. Mine was the earlier model of those. So yeah, there's part of me that was really sad that I had to sell it, but I had to move back to Sydney, and I didn't have enough money to buy back where I used to live. So I had to sell it.
yeah. You've had so many different musical lives as a musician, management, production, all sorts of stuff. If you could only have done one job, which one would you select?
Oh, that's a good question, Greg. That's a good question. Uh, I think it would be the production stuff. It would be producing music. I love the walking into a studio with nothing and walking out the other, 8 hours later with something. So I think that's the part of my music career that I like the most. I think the most rewarding one for me was working with Jimmy Little.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
tell me about Jimmy. What sort of person was he?
Gee, he was just so special, so different. He was like a wise old uncle, and he had this quiet demeanor about him. Um, didn't get flustered about anything. Um, and when we started going out into remote communities, because his newfound fame and fortune from Messenger, from that album, which is where I met him. Um, he wanted to use his notoriety for the betterment of his people. So we'd started going out to these remote communities, like one that I'm at. I'm at Uluru at the moment, and I'm about to go to Mutijulu, which is one of the first communities I went to. And we would turn up in these communities, and all of the significant people, the elders and the traditional owners, everyone wanted to see Jimmy because he was an icon. And Jimmy had just turned to me and say, "Oh, this is my friend Buzz," and I'd be introduced to all of these significant people um, as a friend of Jimmy's, which was a beautiful way of him bringing me into his world, so that when we started the Jimmy Little Foundation, and then later on Uncle Jimmy Thumbs Up, which is what I still run right now, um, uh, when we started doing that, I had this connection to so many people within the Aboriginal world that it just it's probably been the most like I say, it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done, and I'm still doing it 20 years later.
And does music play a role in that kind of work?
Yeah, so we use music to engage kids and community. So, like today, for example, I'm going to the Narrandjara College. I'll teach a bit of drums. We'll teach a bit of guitar. We'll have a jam, and getting ready for the weekend, which is the 40th anniversary of the Handback of the Rock. So those kids that I'm working with today will do a little performance at it. Then later on tonight, I'll be in the community with the band, the local Mutijulu band, getting ready for their performance at the Handback. And we're doing, we do like workshops, skills development workshops. I'll be actually be showing them how to reskin a complete drum kit, because they do tend to hit them rather hard. So I've got some new skins for them. So yeah, look, it's a whole combination of the work that I started with Jimmy, that now he's been gone now for quite some time, but I still feel he's around. I have this amazing connection with so many different Indigenous people around Australia, that I do understand how they feel about people who pass away, that their spirits are there. I very often feel Jimmy with me, and doing the work, continually doing the work that we started together, is something that I look forward to every day.
Yeah. You talk about Jimmy's passing. One of the things I noticed in the book was the amount of people that you mentioned with RIP next to their name. Uh,
I know.
so many
I,
people. What's that taught you about life?
I think that you can't ever take it for granted. You don't ever think, well, I'm going to live forever. I think you've got to make the most of every day. I can't just sit around and do nothing. I find that very hard to do. Um, but yeah, I think recognizing the people who have passed away. I started doing it when I first started writing the book, and I just sort of put them in, and then after a while I realized there were so many of them that I did ask a few people, "Do you think I should not do that?" And 9 times out of 10 people would say, "No, no, no, it's a good thing to do, because you're recognizing, you're acknowledging these people."
Yeah. Um, Also, speaking of 40th anniversaries, 40 years since the debut album for Gangajang.
Good old Gangajang.
Yeah. Tell me about the relationship between the band and Brazil.
Look, it's a wonderful little relationship that began when a surf judge in Brazil decided that he would start playing what he called Aussie surf music on his radio show to promote his surf contests, right? And he would play Australian Crawl, and he would play Hoodoo Gurus, Midnight Oil, and Gangajang, and Spy v Spy. He also played Men at Work. They're not really a surf band, but so he started just doing this, playing these songs on his radio show, and they became so popular that a friend of his said, "Look, why don't you do a tour and bring a band?" And I think the first band that he bought was either Hoodoo Gurus with Spy v Spy, and then he did Australian Crawl, and then he rang up Gangajang, and the reason that we are on the radar, another reason, is the surf movie called Mad Wax that I was a music director for in 1986, where it featured all of the top surfers in the world at the time. And because of my friendship with a guy from Quicksilver, the soundtrack was all Gangajang songs. It didn't have any other music in it. It was one of the first, I think the only surf film that's got just one band's music in it. So that was another reason why people knew about Gangajang in Brazil. But when we started touring there, it was incredible. Like we got there and we went down underneath a shopping center, came up there into the venue, and it was a 15,000 seat venue, like this massive venue, like an entertainment center size venue. And I was just looking at it thinking to myself, this guy's going to lose his shirt. He's not going to get very many people at this, and this is going to be really embarrassing. Anyway, we went back to the hotel, came back again, and I had a little peek out of the window, out of the curtain, and there was 15,000 people there. And most of them knew our songs, which was incredible. And that happened all around Brazil. And we've just finished our fourth, we've had our fourth tour there last year. It's just amazing. I love it. It's just a beautiful place.
Yeah. And what about locally? Any plans to celebrate the 40th anniversary?
Well, we had a few little gigs just a couple of weeks ago. We had some in Brisbane and some in Sydney. Unfortunately, we couldn't get everyone together. We've got this unfortunate situation where we've got one guy lives in Adelaide, two live in Brisbane, I live in Sydney, Mark lives in Mittagong, so we're all kind of around the place. But I think next year, although it won't be the 40th as such, we'll do more gigs next year. We just couldn't get it together this year, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, Buzz, there's so much we could talk about, but people should go out and buy the book and read about it themselves. It's called No Secrets, fantastic book, and it's been great to chat.
Thank you, Greg, and thanks everyone, and Merry Christmas to all, and we'll see you another time.